dangerous situation. The criminal gangs are undermining border security. They are putting lives at risk. In the first half of the year, the numbers of crossings that we inherited from the previous government were a record high for spring crossings. Those gangs should not be able to get away with it, and that's why we're determined to go after them with the National Crime Agency, working with Europol, expanding the additional investigators.
Cooper's student asylum crackdown, political theatre or real change? Before we dive into today's rather explosive developments in Westminster, do hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because frankly, British politics moves faster than a Tory U-turn these days, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Right then, let's talk about Yvette Cooper's latest proclamation, shall we? The Home Secretary has just announced she's going to clamp down on international students who dare to seek asylum when their visas expire. Bold words from a government that's supposedly more compassionate than its predecessors. But let's examine what's really happening beneath this rather theatrical announcement. Picture the scenario. You're an international student who spent years studying in Britain, paying extortionate fees that keep our universities afloat, contributing to local economies, and forming genuine ties to communities across the country. Your visa expires, but circumstances in your home country have deteriorated dramatically. Perhaps there's been a coup. Perhaps your family faces persecution. Perhaps returning home means imprisonment or worse. What do you do? Well, according to Cooper, you should simply pack your bags and accept whatever fate awaits you back home. The Home Secretary claims that as many as 15,000 students apply for asylum at the conclusion of their studies, and she's now sending threatening letters to tens of thousands more, essentially telling them to clear off or face deportation. It's a fascinating approach from a Labour government that once positioned itself as a party of human rights and international solidarity. How times change when you're sitting in the hot seat of power. But here's where it gets particularly interesting, and frankly, where Cooper's logic starts to unravel like a cheap jumper from Primark. She's simultaneously announcing a suspension of the family reunion program for refugees, claiming that criminal gangs are exploiting it to promote small boat crossings. Let me get this straight. We're cracking down on students who are already here legally, studying at our institutions, while also making it harder for legitimate refugees to bring their families through safe, legal routes. The cognitive dissonance is rather spectacular, isn't it? Dr. Nuni Jorgensen from Oxford Migration Observatory has pointed out something rather crucial that Cooper seems to have glossed over entirely. The percentage of asylum applications from students did indeed rise from 9% in 2022 to 15% in 2024. But what Cooper conveniently fails to mention is the context behind these numbers. Are we seeing a genuine abuse of the system, or are we witnessing the natural consequence of increasing global instability affecting the very countries these students come from? Let's be brutally honest about what's really happening here. Keir Starmer is feeling the heat from Reform UK breathing down Labour's neck, and nothing says we're tough on immigration quite like targeting vulnerable students who've already contributed millions to British universities. It's political theatre of the most cynical kind, designed to appeal to voters who might otherwise drift towards Nigel Farage's latest political venture. The irony is absolutely delicious when you consider that British universities have become increasingly dependent on international student fees. These institutions generated approximately £10 billion in fees during the 2021-22 academic year alone. That's not pocket change. That's the lifeblood keeping our higher education sector competitive on the global stage. Yet here we are, essentially biting the hand that feeds us while simultaneously demanding it keeps paying premium rates for the privilege. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, has predictably jumped on this announcement, calling it nothing but more slogans and press releases. Now, coming from the Conservatives, this criticism is rather rich, considering they perfected the art of immigration-related sloganeering during their 14 years in power. Remember, go home, Vans. Take back control. The Rwanda scheme that cost taxpayers hundreds of millions and deported precisely 0 people, glass houses, stones, and all that. But Philp does raise a valid point about Labour's actual track record since taking office. They have closed 3 hotels used for asylum accommodation in an entire year. 3. That's hardly the comprehensive reform that voters were promised during the election campaign. It's more like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while claiming you revolutionized maritime safety. The Liberal Democrats, ever the voice of reason in British politics when nobody's listening, has suggested focusing on speeding up asylum applications instead. What a radical concept. Actually processing claims efficiently so people with legitimate cases can contribute to society rather than languishing in legal limbo for years. But efficiency doesn't make for dramatic headlines, does it? What's particularly galling about Cooper's announcement is a complete lack of detail about implementation. She talks about deporting students whose claims are without merit, but as Dr. Jorgensen noted, there's no clarity about how these determinations will be made or whether applicants will still go through proper asylum procedures. Are we talking about summary deportations based on bureaucratic whims, or will there be genuine due process? The silence is deafening. This policy vacuum isn't accidental. It's strategic ambiguity designed to sound tough while avoiding the messy details of actual implementation. It's the political equivalent of promising to solve climate change without explaining how you'll reduce emissions. All rhetoric, no substance, but plenty of potential for things to go spectacularly wrong. Let's examine the broader implications of this approach. Britain has traditionally prided itself on offering sanctuary to those fleeing persecution. It's part of our national identity, woven into our post-war narrative of standing up to tyranny and protecting the vulnerable. Yet here we are, essentially telling students who might face genuine persecution that bureaucratic convenience trumps human rights considerations. The timing of this announcement is also rather convenient, isn't it? Just as the government faces mounting criticism over its handling of various domestic crises, from the NHS to housing to the economy, suddenly we're talking about cracking down on foreign students. It's the oldest trick in political playbook. When in doubt, blame the immigrants. Never mind that these particular immigrants are paying premium rates to study here and contributing significantly to our economy. But perhaps most cynically, Cooper is framing this as tackling smuggling gangs while simultaneously making legal migration more difficult. It's like closing the front door of your house and then expressing shock when people try to climb through the windows. If you restrict safe, legal routes for people to bring their families or seek protection, you inevitably push them towards dangerous alternatives. The Refugee Council has warned that these policies will only push more desperate people into the arms of smugglers. It's not rocket science. When you eliminate legitimate pathways, people don't simply give up and accept their fate. They find alternative routes, often dangerous ones that enrich the very criminal networks the government claims to be targeting. This brings us to the fundamental contradiction at the heart of Labour's immigration strategy. They want to appear tough on irregular migration while simultaneously reducing the legal alternatives that might prevent it. It's like trying to reduce car crime by banning the sale of cars, counterproductive, illogical, and likely to make the problem worse. The political calculation here is transparent. Labour knows that immigration is a key concern for voters who might otherwise support Reform UK. Rather than making the case of managed migration and the benefits it brings, they've chosen to adopt a watered-down version of conservative rhetoric. It's politically expedient but morally questionable and practically dubious. What's particularly frustrating is that there are genuine solutions available if the government had the political courage to implement them. Properly fund the asylum system to reduce processing times. Create more legal routes for migration and family reunion. Invest in integration programs that help newcomers contribute more quickly to society. Work with universities to develop clearer pathways for students who might face genuine risks upon return. Instead, we get threatening letters and tough-sounding press releases that do nothing to address the underlying issues while potentially creating new problems. It's governance by headline rather than evidence-based policy-making, and it's becoming depressingly familiar from the supposedly more competent Labour administration. The broader context makes this even more concerning. We're living through a period of unprecedented global displacement, with conflicts and climate change forcing millions from their homes. Britain's response has been to progressively retreat from our international obligations, creating an increasingly hostile environment for anyone seeking protection. This isn't just morally questionable, it's strategically short-sighted. Britain's soft power and international reputation had traditionally been significant assets in our post-imperial identity. When we're seen as turning our backs on vulnerable people for narrow political advantage, it damages our standing globally and our ability to lead on international issues. The university sector, which has been remarkably quiet about this announcement, needs to wake up to what's happening. Their international students are being used as political footballs while generating the fees that keep many institutions viable. If universities want to maintain their global reputation and continue attracting top talent, they need to speak up for their students rather than hoping this controversy will blow over. The media's coverage of this issue has also been revealing. Rather than scrutinizing the lack of detail in Cooper's proposals or examining the broader implications, much of the coverage has focused on the political optics and party positioning. It's symptomatic of a political discourse that's more interested in the theater of governance than its substance. What we're witnessing is a gradual normalization of increasingly harsh immigration policies, packaged in the language of efficiency and border security. Each announcement shifts the Overton window a little further towards treating migration as an inherently problematic phenomenon rather than a normal part of human existence that can be managed humanely and effectively. The impact on individual lives gets lost in these political calculations. Behind every statistic about asylum applications is a human being facing difficult circumstances, often with genuine fears about returning home. Reducing their situations to numbers on a spreadsheet or problems to be solved through deportation threats demonstrates profound lack of empathy that should concern us all. This brings us to a crucial question about British identity and values. Are we the kind of country that respond to complex global challenges with compassion and practical solutions? Or do we retreat into insularity and blame those seeking help for problems largely beyond their control? Cooper's announcement suggests we're increasingly choosing the latter path. The economic implications are also worth considering. International students contribute far more to the British economy than just their tuition fees. They support local businesses, create jobs, and many remain to contribute their skills to British industries. Treating them as potential threats rather than valuable contributors seems economically illiterate as well as morally questionable. Furthermore, many of these students come from countries experiencing significant political upheaval or human rights crises. Nigeria, Hong Kong, Iran, Afghanistan. Students from these regions might have legitimate reasons to fear returning home that have nothing to do with gaming the immigration system and everything to do with genuine safety concerns. Cooper's failure to acknowledge this context, or to explain how her policy will distinguish between legitimate protection needs and alleged system abuse, suggests either ignorance of the complexities involved or deliberate decision to ignore them for political convenience. The suspension of family reunion programs is equally problematic. These schemes allow refugees who've already been granted protection to bring immediate family members through safe, legal routes. Suspending them doesn't reduce migration. It forces vulnerable people into dangerous journeys that enrich smuggling networks while potentially separating families for years or permanently. It's worth noting that family reunion numbers are relatively small compared to overall migration figures. In 2023, fewer than 6,000 people enter the UK through family reunion programs. This is hardly the mass exploitation of the system that Cooper's rhetoric suggests. Yet even these modest numbers are apparently too much for a Labour government that once championed family unity and human rights. The political messaging around this issue has been carefully crafted to avoid scrutiny while maximizing impact. By focusing on clamping down and tackling smuggling gangs, Cooper creates the impression of decisive action without having to explain the practical details or potential consequences of her proposals. It's classic political spin, designed to generate supportive headlines while avoiding awkward questions. But the lack of detail is itself revealing. If the government had confidence in its proposals, wouldn't it want to explain exactly how they'll work? The vagueness suggests either poor policy development or awareness that the details might not withstand public scrutiny. Neither interpretation reflects well on Labour's competence or transparency. What's clear is that Starmer's government is feeling intense pressure to demonstrate toughness on immigration, particularly given Reform UK's growing influence and the Conservative Party's attempts to rebuild credibility on this issue. But responding to political pressure with poorly thought-out policies rarely ends well, as the previous Conservative government demonstrated repeatedly. The question now is whether Labour will have the courage to develop more thoughtful, evidence-based approaches to migration challenges, or whether we'll see more knee-jerk reactions designed to placate critics rather than solve problems. Given the political dynamics at play, optimism seems increasingly misplaced. What's most disappointing is the missed opportunity this represents. Labour could have used its electoral mandate to make the case for managed migration, explaining the benefits while addressing legitimate concerns about capacity and integration. Instead, they've chosen to accept the framing that migration is inherently problematic and must be minimized at all costs. This acceptance of right-wing narratives around immigration doesn't just affect policy, it shapes public discourse and makes it harder for future governments to take more balanced approaches. Each concession to anti-immigration sentiment makes the next one easier and more politically necessary. So where does this leave us? With a government that's abandoned its principles in pursuit of political expediency, policies that are likely to create more problems than they solve, and a public discourse that is increasingly hostile to anyone seeking protection or opportunity in Britain. It's not a particularly edifying spectacle for a country that once prided itself on fairness and decency. The real test will be implementation. Will Cooper's threats materialize into actual deportations, or will they remain political theater? Will the suspension of family reunion programs actually reduce small boat crossings, or will it simply force more people into dangerous journeys? Will universities speak up for their students, or will they remain silent to avoid political controversy? These questions matter because they'll determine whether Britain remains a country that attracts global talent and offers genuine sanctuary to those who need it, or whether we retreat into the kind of insularity that historically has made us weaker, poorer, and less influential on the world stage. The stakes couldn't be higher, yet the political discourse couldn't be more debased. We deserve better than threatening letters and empty slogans masquerading as immigration policy. Whether we'll get it remains to be seen. But if today's announcement is anything to go by, the prospects look rather grim indeed. Cooper's asylum crackdown represents everything wrong with contemporary British politics: short-term thinking, policy by press release, and a subordination of evidence and compassion to crude political calculation. It's a shameful episode that reveals how far we've fallen from the ideals we once claimed to embody. The only question now is whether we'll recognize this decline and reverse it, or continue sliding towards a more insular, hostile version of ourselves that will be unrecognizable to previous generations who built modern Britain on very different principles. Whether you agree with these policies or not, one thing is certain: this won't be the last dramatic twist in Labour's ongoing immigration saga. Make sure you're subscribed to UK Connors, because we'll be following every development, dissecting every announcement, and holding power to account regardless of which party happens to be making the decisions. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and keep demanding better from those who govern in our name.